In Atlanta, another body was discovered today, the 23rd. Larry Rogers, a 21-year-old black man, last seen getting into a green car near his home March 30th, had been listed as missing. Like 11 other recent victims in Atlanta, Rogers apparently was asphyxiated. Meanwhile, the entire investigation has taken a new direction, as Bob Serpin reports.
It was the summer of 1979. The kids were getting ready for break, and others were just thrilled to find things to do while they were off. Most families had to work at all odd hours of the day, so many of the kids found odd jobs to do around the city just to make some extra cash. With racism and the KKK still roaming around the South like a dark cloud, every suspicious person would be seen as a suspect. African American children were starting to disappear. The blame is set on one person, Wayne Williams. But with the killer breaking his patterns every so often, could there be more than one person involved? On July 28, 1979, 13-year-old Alfred Evans was found strangled in the woods not too far from the fairgrounds. 4 days later, Edward Hope Smith, 14 years of age, was also found not too far away from Evans. He was shot in his back with a .22 caliber gun. Being that drugs played a major role in Atlanta's crime involvement at the time, police first saw both murders as drug-related. That was later written off, and both boys would be considered the first victims of the Atlanta murders.
Aaron Jackson Jr. was among the youngest, only 9 years old. Luby Jeter was 14, Timothy Hill, 13, Patrick Baltazar, 11. For almost 2 years, the bodies have kept coming out of Atlanta's rivers and woods, and week after week, police speak of sorrow and sympathy, but not a solution.
It's just a tragic, horrible nightmare that we're going through.
We're not in a position today to make an arrest.
There are cases in history that have gone on much longer than this has.
At Police Task Force headquarters, there are 27 faces on the wall, 26 murdered, 1 missing. The killer? There is a handful of sketches, no one the same, no one certain to be the person police want. Almost a year after the task force was set up, police can't answer who or why. They don't know how or where or even how many of the black victims may have been killed by the same person. One investigator says even if the killer walked in the door and confessed, there is not enough evidence now to convict him. A half dozen of the cases may be isolated, unrelated homicides, the victims found near home, killed perhaps by family or friends. But somewhere in the city of Atlanta, there is a person who has killed 15 or 20 boys and young men. The district attorney keeps a chart on the wall with names of the dead and room for more.
With my theory, the person is not abducted, not kidnapped, not snatched off the street at that particular time, but is willingly going with somebody for something, at least at the instance they get in the car. They're going to make some money, or they're going to meet somebody. They're going starting off willingly.
Like many victims, JoJo Bell, 15, was a child of the streets, always in need of money. He worked for his supper once in a while at the seafood carryout and always asked the owner to give him a ride home.
He wouldn't walk the street at night because of the killing. You know, they used to joke about it. You know, he said, I ain't gonna let the kid snatch me. But someone did. Yeah, somebody did.
Bell had been a basketball buddy of Timothy Hill. Hill spent his last known night at the seedy shack on Gray Street, the home of a 63-year-old homosexual called Uncle Tom. None of the victims has been found sexually abused, but the obvious question intrigues investigators. Mickey McIntosh, one of the adults killed, hung around the same carryout where JoJo Bell worked.
You know, I have seen gays come down and seen Mickey in the car with, gays. They would be dressed all up and stuff. They'll come by here and sometimes look for Mickey.
Atlanta's safety commissioner will say only what he doesn't know.
Where we are in the investigation right now is we do not know the person or persons that are responsible, therefore we do not have the motive.
The killer seems to taunt police and read press clippings. After a well-publicized but futile search along a road in an outlying county, the next child strangled with a rope was dumped there. And when a suburban police official criticized Atlanta's investigation, a child choked to death was left just inside that official's county line. After a press report that police had found fibers on some of the bodies, 6 of the last 7 victims have been dropped into rivers, all stripped to their undershorts or less, possibly to wash away evidence. NBC News has learned in some cases the synthetic fibers were found on victims' clothing hanging in closets at home, indicating those children may have visited their killer at times before their death. But authorities have had this secret evidence for weeks, and it still has not led to the killer. Police are undermanned, and there is grumbling in the ranks. One patrolman is quoted, "They don't tell us anything. It seems like they don't trust us." The murder investigation is being run by a 103-person task force. One official concedes it's not even certain what to tell the cop on the beat to look for. The investigation seems beset by friction and frustration.
We're going to solve the cases. That's our resolve. The only unanswered question right now is when.
Meanwhile, at this cemetery, the dead, Bell, Hill, McIntosh, are being buried faster than the cemetery can supply grave markers with their names. Sadly, some officials concede Atlanta is unlikely to catch the killer unless he keeps on killing.
I will say that there's a better chance to catch him if he doesn't stop.
James Polk, NBC News, Atlanta.
Edwards Hope Smith was on his way home from a skating rink when he was found shot and killed. He was expected to meet his girlfriend later on, but never arrived. On November 5th, 1979, 14-year-old Milton Harvey's remains were found on Desert Road near Southside Atlanta. Police were puzzled when they noticed that Milton was missing a pair of blue striped socks and his sneakers. Not even a full month had passed before another young African-American boy had been found. 9-year-old Yusuf Bell was found strangled and stuffed in a crawl space inside of an abandoned school building 4 blocks away from his home. On March 4th, 1980, 12-year-old Angel Lanier was found strangled and raped while being tied to a tree. Angel Lanier was just a few blocks away from her home. Angel and her mother decided to move from Chicago to Atlanta with the intent of growing up in a better environment. On February 13th, 1981, 10-year-old Jeffrey Martin's remains were found near Suber and Cascade, not too far from Plummer Road. 11 months prior, Mathis left his home to buy cigarettes for his mom at the convenience store. Mathis was known for being a straight-A student at school. March 11th, 1980, would be the last time his mother would see him alive. On May 18th, 1980, 15-year-old Eric Middlebrooks was found dead behind a tavern around southeast Atlanta. Eric's death was ruled a homicide by blunt force trauma to the head. It was said that Middlebrooks' murder was an act of vengeance. A few weeks prior, Middlebrooks was said to testify against a few juveniles concerning a robbery case. Being that his murder is considered suspicious, he is still included in the Atlanta child murders. Summer in Atlanta was in full swing. The weather was perfect, but everyone grew more and more fearful of what was yet to come. Children in the neighboring cities of Atlanta were preparing for time off from teachers and school books. Christopher Richardson was one of them. Around late spring, 12-year-old Christopher Richardson went missing while on his way to a public swimming pool in Decatur, Georgia. 8 months later, his remains were discovered. On July 6, 1980, 9-year-old Anthony Carter went missing from his home. 1 day later, he was found dead, laying near a neighborhood warehouse. Anthony sustained multiple stab wounds. Authorities speculated a possibility of another suspect unrelated to the other Atlanta murders. 3 weeks later, 10-year-old Earl Terrell was seen leaving a public swimming pool near a park located in the southeast Atlanta area. 6 months later, Earl's body was discovered next to 12-year-old Christopher Richardson. This led police to believe that both crimes were related. Cause of death was ruled undetermined. It is said that there were allegedly a few items found nearby at the crime scene: a Penthouse magazine, shotgun shells, Gallery magazine, a magnetic recording tape, and a cigarette butt. It is also said to believe that fingerprints from the gallery magazine had been found, and a match was found, but authorities didn't believe that this person was a viable suspect in the case. Summer came and went, but the Atlanta murders continued. On September 14, 1980, 10-year-old Darren Glass had been reported missing from his foster home. Darren Glass was a frequent runaway and ran away from almost every foster home that he was placed in. He is not always included in the Atlanta murders since his body has never been recovered. However, he did remain missing at the exact time of the murders. There is a strong possibility that his disappearance is connected. On October 9, 1980, 12-year-old Charles Stevens had been reported missing after not returning home. The following day, his body was found in a trailer park 5 miles away from home. Cause of death was suffocation. Police were finally able to collect green pieces of fiber from the scene for further analysis. A few weeks later, on November 1, 1980, 9-year-old Aaron Jackson had went missing. Known for spending most of his time roaming around Atlanta, it was not uncommon for him to go out for several hours at a time. On November 2, 1980, Aaron's father, Aaron Jackson, turned on his TV only to see the dead body of his own son, while he's seen lying face down on the ground. Aaron Jackson had been strangled to death, face up on a riverbank. Aaron's father quickly called police. A few weeks later, on December 7, 1980, 16-year-old Patrick Rogers' body was pulled out of the Chattahoochee River. Patrick went missing about a week prior to his murder. Rogers' death was caused by a head injury. It's said that Rogers was known to be the first victim suspected of having been dropped in the river from a bridge. 14-year-old Luby Geeter had been selling car air fresheners at a local Atlanta mall when he went missing. On February 5, 1981, his body was found. He was strangled and left for dead at a wooded area nearby. On January 22, 1981, 15-year-old Terry Pugh went missing. That very night, he was seen at a hamburger restaurant in East Atlanta. The next morning, Pugh was found strangled on the side of the road near Rockdale County by a passerby. At the time, it was said that investigators were getting random phone calls by a man allegedly claiming to have dumped a young man's body by the area. Years later, another body had been found in the same area. A few days prior, on February 6, 1981, Baltazar was last seen at the Galaxy 3 arcade up until midnight. His father worked at the Fisherman's Cove, not too far from the arcade he frequented in the Omni. Patrick Baltazar was known for hanging out with Jimmy Ray Payne in his front yard, another possible victim of the Atlanta child murders. A witness by the name of Margaret Jackson, also known as Patsy, had reported seeing a light green 68 to 69 Chevy Impala parked near the area. No other cars were around at the time. Inside the car was a white man around his 20s with brown shoulder-length hair, a small mustache, and closed set of eyes. He was also wearing a plaid shirt. The suspect kept eyeing Patsy until she walked into the corporate office where Baltazar's body was found. Patsy worked as a dental assistant there. Scrapes, bruises, and dog hairs were found on the body. Not disregarding the witness, we also have to take into consideration that Williams did have a dog at the time and was also seen by co-workers with several scratches around his arms and face. On March 6, 1981, the lifeless body of Curtis Walker was found submerged and stuck on a log near the South River bank. Curtis Walker was last seen at a gun store where he was applying for work. Walker had been smothered to death. While Curtis Walker's body had been recovered, 15-year-old Joseph Bell had went missing. A month later, on April 20th, 1981, His body was found in the South River. He was last seen at the fast food fish restaurant not too far from home, where he performed odd jobs each week for money. 1 month prior to the discovery of Joseph Bell's body, aka JoJo, 13-year-old Timothy Hill was found suffocated to death in the Chattahoochee River. He was smothered. On March 31, 1981, 21-year-old Eddie Duncan was found by canoeists on the Douglas County side of the Chattahoochee River, not too far from where Timothy Hill was found 24 hours prior. Both weren't too far from Fulton's southern boundary. All of Eddie Duncan's clothes were missing except for his boxers. Cause of death was undetermined. Eddie Duncan was last seen by a 15-year-old neighbor who was very vocal to her about receiving $200 for helping someone paint. Others said that they saw Duncan getting into a car with a light-skinned man at the corner of Techwood Drive and Varsity. So what do we know so far? Convicted murderer Wayne Williams was given life in prison for the deaths of 2 of the Atlanta victims, 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater and 21-year-old Jimmy Payne. Prosecutors were able to match 19 different fibers from Wayne's car, home, bathroom, gloves, bed sheets, carpets, dog, and a very rare-looking tribal carpet fiber that he owned. These helped to connect him back to a few victims. Wayne Williams was very inconsistent when it came to his whereabouts at around the time of the disappearances. Witnesses at the stand also placed Williams near the scene of many of the victims at around the time of their disappearances. Williams was also given 3 polygraph tests and failed all 3. The killer was said to have thrown some of the bodies into the Chattahoochee River. Many of the victims, including Timothy Hill and Patrick Rogers, were both suspected of being thrown in or near the river. The killer was also known to have strangled or asphyxiated most of his victims. Stabbings were uncommon, but not ruled out as a possibility. On a separate occasion, suspect used a .22 caliber gun to shoot and kill his victims. Suspect also purposely removed a few items from most of the victims, including Edward Hope Smith, who had his socks and leather sun visor removed. The suspect killed most of his victims at around the summertime, May to August of 1980, before he started killing again in the fall of 1980. Victims were between the ages of 7 and 21, all of African American descent. Authorities also remember surveilling suspect Wayne Williams on May 22, 1981, when police officers watching over Williams while driving through the James Jackson Parkway Bridge, stretching through the Chattahoochee River, heard a big splash. Police informants suggested that Williams might have thrown a body while possibly stopping through the bridge. Williams was the last vehicle to have ever passed through the bridge at around 3 a.m. When Williams was questioned about it, he claimed to be on his way to see the young singer named Cheryl Johnson. However, the name and number given to police was said to be fictitious. On June 21, 1981, Williams was finally arrested for murder. However, he is yet to be cleared from all of the Atlanta murders due to lack of physical evidence. Right after the murder of Clifford Jones, police asked around and got an interesting response of events that had occurred right before Jones's death. Children from the neighborhood had claimed to be peeking through the window of the laundromat at Hollywood Plaza when they witnessed Clifford getting physically assaulted by the manager of the laundromat, Jamie Brooks, and another man named Calvin. They also allegedly witnessed both suspects carrying his body to the trash. Another witness had claimed that the manager took Clifford and another man to his residence right before he was killed. The same witness recollects seeing the same robe that was seen on a man at around the same time that Clifford went missing. This mysterious man had been walking past Jamie Brooks's home and was seen placing a large plastic bag near the dumpster. There were accusations that Mr. Brooks was sexually assaulting Clifford before his death. Brooks was later sentenced to aggravated assault with intent to rape on an unrelated charge. He later died of AIDS. Police followed up on every lead possible. Some were inconsistent, but there were others that could have possibly been viable clues as to what happened to some of the murder victims. Because we have no closure for all of the victims involved, it's important to overlook the case and see what could have been possibly missed. If you have any information regarding the Atlanta murders, please call the Atlanta Police Department at 404-546-2603. You can remain anonymous.